I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which I record this podcast, the land of the Kabi Kabi peoples. I pay my respects to the traditional owners of country and their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Here on the Smart Community podcast, we talk about data, technology, communities, and the future. First Nations peoples have been sharing knowledge, caring for country, and telling stories for tens of thousands of years. I honour that deep connection to storytelling and community connection as we continue our conversation together here today. Hi, Smart Community friends, and welcome back to this very special series here on the Smart Community podcast, all about data storytelling as part of my PhD research. In this episode of the Smart Community podcast, I have a really brilliant discussion with Dietmar Offenhuber. Dietmar is a professor at Northeastern University in Boston and the chair of the Art and Design Department. With a background originally in architecture, Dietmar has spent decades exploring information visualization. In this episode, Dietmar tells us about his expanded concept of visualization beyond traditional data mapping, and his theory of autographic design, which is methods for visualizing the emergence of data rather than just its final representation. We talk about the importance of understanding context over generalizing visualization principles and lessons learned from bottom-up citizen data collection efforts. Dietmar and I discuss accountability technologies, the challenges of assuming theories of change in data visualization, and why physical traces can sometimes be more powerful than sophisticated data displays. We finish our chat discussing Dietmar's advice about keeping data storytelling really simple, but also while embracing its speculative and playful aspects. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the Smart Community, Smart Region, Smart Towns, and Smart Cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Dietmar. How are you today?
Hello, Sully. I'm fine. I'm glad to talk to you across the world.
I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today and for you to share some insights and knowledge about data visualizations and storytelling. So let's just jump straight in. Can you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, and even a little bit about your current work and projects?
Yeah. So my name is Dietmar Offenhuber. I'm currently a professor at Northeastern University in Boston. I'm also the chair of the Art and Design Department, and I also have appointments in other departments like Public Policy and Urban Affairs. I'm also working with the Harvard Meta Lab. So my background originally is architecture, but even in my architecture studies in the 90s, I was actually focusing on information visualization, mostly from a mapping perspective, how to understand, capture subjective spaces of experience was one of these really big topics that I was interested in 20 years ago, maybe still am, and did a PhD in urban planning. Also was at the Media Lab in the meantime at MIT both. And I would say my research originally was very strongly connected to the urban environment to understand the relationship between data representation, social practices, and more recently, I've moved a little bit more into design theory. So I would say my concept of visualization has very much expanded over the last decades. Like traditionally, data visualization, we would talk about this, the term model of data mapping, where you have data structures that you map to visual languages, and then you kind of, display that so people can capture things through their visual perception. But if we especially look at storytelling, anything can be a visualization. There's not really any natural boundary that we need to respect.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. The different, like, I guess, mediums and things like that, because that's also come up in my research, and whether I want to look at a more traditional visualizations, graphs and scatter plots and other ways to represent data in a whole range of options, I suppose. But now I'm talking to people about documentaries and art exhibitions and things like that, and that really does pique my interest. So I don't want to narrow it down. I mean, obviously we've only got so much time to finish a PhD, but yeah, those different mediums are really interesting as well. And I think they offer such a valuable way for the community then to connect with the data if, they're not data people, or not even the community, but other people as well. In a professional sense or a decision maker, they're not necessarily data people. And so how can we then get them interested in the data that's so important, because we have so much of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already a large step if you call visualization a medium rather than just a, let's say, display modality, because a medium can be many things, like a medium is improvisational. People, kind of use it against the grain. And so a lot of super interesting social phenomena happen when we start looking at a medium rather than just a visual convention.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've tell us a little bit about your background, some of the work that you're doing. And this is probably a big question because you probably have lots of answers, but like, how do you or your organization that you're working for, or multiple organizations, use data visualizations or storytelling?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, like, academically, I've worked on the topic for a very long time, but I really experienced it with my own body almost when I started becoming the chair of the department. And it's a large university, everything is data driven. We try to make arguments to the university, try to explain to them what we need, and somehow we keep talking past each other. And of course, they look at data to make decisions. But the data doesn't really represent us correctly. They have a different way of counting things that don't really match up with how things are on the ground. So what we did in the department is, okay, we have to figure out different ways how we can represent ourselves in these data sets, and then use that as a conversation with the university. And interestingly, what happened in this process of collecting data, faculty came together, everyone was, engaged in this common project. So I think this is has a lot to do with what is the interesting thing about data. For me, it's not the evidentiary value. It's not necessarily that this one number is correct and this one number really justifies a particular decision. Of course, to some extent, that is always the case. But if we only look at that, we are missing a lot of interesting things that are happening around data sets as artifacts that lead to collaborations that are embedded into conversations that have a material context and so on. So this is really just this example of what I experienced in the department. But from my research, I also saw a lot of really interesting things, especially when we talk about storytelling and decision making. So maybe I think this was in 2011, I organized a symposium with a colleague, Katja Schechtner, where we coined the term accountability technologies. This was about groups of, bottom-up groups, citizen groups, activists that got together to collect data for accountability purposes. For example, to show that one politician has plagiarized in his dissertation and had to step down. Or we had in this symposium, we had people from the Arab Spring, like how do they use social media? How do they use visualization? And so everyone was very excited about this idea of looking at visualization through this lens of advocacy and accountability to show, all the problems that exist so that we can affect change. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. And of course, we also know what happened to the Arab Spring and all of these things. So what I'm trying to get at is that we assume certain theories of change. We assume that if we use a visualization, then it will affect a certain kind of rethinking or change in the world. But these assumptions are often very problematic if we don't really reflect them. So this has become one thing that I was very interested in.
So when you say that you were thinking, oh, we've not just shown them the data, we've shown them the beautiful visualization with all the right techniques, all the right design, then they should just make the right decision. And we know that change doesn't happen like that because there's, many different reasons. I mean, human behavior, but also the system of systems that we know is at play. So lots of things need to change. But do you think from, I guess, visualization or storytelling, there's, I guess, even micro changes that happen a bit like the butterfly effect, I suppose. But it's hard to measure that impact, right?
So, I mean, I think I wouldn't tie it to visualization methods. I'm at this point, after all these years, I'm not even sure if a very well-designed visualization has more impact than a very poorly designed one. So I'm not so sure whether these Tufte principles, I mean, they reflect a certain ethos of working with data that is justified. But when you really want to talk about like changing the world, it's probably, too simplistic to think that this is going to be everything that is necessary. So I would say the biggest, critique I have around theories around visualization is this tendency to generalize. A particular visualization can be super effective in a particular context. And then we start looking at, okay, how do they do it? Can we use same principles, the same techniques in a different context? Then it doesn't work anymore.
So the context.
It's all in the context for me.
It's all in the context. So it's not actually saying this decision got changed because they use this type of design, they use this data, they put this narrative around it, etc. We just copy and paste that into our problem that we're trying to solve. But it's a completely different context. And also we're not like what happens before that visualization, what happens after that visualization, like the conversations that were had, I don't know, the other things that the decision maker saw or was notified of. Like there's all these things that come in. We're not tying it to a specific, if you just do a bubble chart with these colors, you'll be able to change the world. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think I want to go back a little bit because you talked about something that I found really interesting. When you're talking about in the university using data as a collaboration tool. So not just the final outcome of the visualization itself being something that you make decisions with, but if you are working together and collaborating with data through a visualization, then that process can be really powerful as well. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so first of all, I think one thing we need to differentiate is whether we are in a highly, let's say, institutional or technical context where you have a certain prescribed style of communication and decision making. This is, of course, a case where I can tailor data visualizations and all kinds of communication materials to that institutional context. Well, if we look at the general public, all bets are off. There are so many ways how information travels. At that point, thinking about particular communication styles in data visualization becomes a fool's errand, I think. But I mean, not to say that it doesn't matter. It's just like so much more complicated. But this effect that data collection practices, data practices, let's call it like that, which includes collection, presentation, analysis, all these collaborative things. This is a really great way to make people work together, to dig deeper into, how to encode where to draw the lines, where to make which decisions. And in a way, this is all happening before a data set exists. So in my last book, Autographic Design, I look exactly at these things. This is in the center because I notice, over the past 10 years, there have been so many attempts to make citizen scientists and activists very data literate or visualization literate. And what I noticed that despite that, a lot of them went back to very analog methods. So basically making tableaus of physical evidence or showing material evidence. And I'm wondering, so why exactly are these very simple physical displays in a way preferred? There are several answers because I wrote a book about it, so there are many possible answers to this. But one answer is that if those are citizen scientists or amateurs, they don't have the credentials of the institution. So if they show a very sophisticated data visualization, everyone is going to immediately say, well, but what kind of data set is that? I mean, can we even trust that the data that you collected is accurate? I mean, look at you, nobody has a PhD and so on. So, and so, of course, they flip it around. Then they basically show a physical trace, some smoke that comes out of a incinerator that has a funny color or something like that. So they show this trace, explain me that. It's like, what is going on here? What does it mean when there's this pink smoke coming out of an incinerator? Is this possible that you have iodine in the waste that is being incinerated? Well, what kind of waste contains iodine? Is it medical waste? Are you permitted to incinerate medical waste? Or why are you doing it if you don't have that permission? So you see, even a very, very simple trace becomes a story. So you can make stories around these that you can't really do in the same way with a data set, I think.
Would you consider then that trace like a type of, it's like an indicator of data or something? Like it's a
yeah, exactly. It's definitely a stage before you have a data set. So let's say these people generate this group of environmental activists collecting a data set. They start with these traces, but when I look at data visualization as a method, I can only start once I have a data set. Because the data sets don't really tell us about how they were collected. I mean, there are some indications, but mostly that context is missing. So I can only interpret patterns that I find in a data set. But this doesn't really help us in this case because all the big controversies that we are dealing with today, global warming, misinformation, pollution, plastic pollution, those kind of things, they're usually about the data source. They're usually about who collects the data, where do the data sets come from, not about how to interpret the patterns in the data, because that would require already accepting that the data set is okay. But this also means that data visualization cannot help us at all in these controversies because it doesn't really strike at the core of the controversy. And this is where I started looking at these practices of amateur data collection, because this in a way visualizes what happens before I have a data set. So it's a visualization method that shows me how data comes into this world and how, all those the material context, the material traces, the social context, all of these processes are at play here. And I came up with this theory of autographic design where I looked at the strategies. How can we visualize the emergence of data, not as an alternative to data visualization, but as a way to contextualize these analyses? Because when I have a data visualization to analyze a phenomenon, the phenomenon is kind of disconnected. I only the data set creates its own reality. I may not know all these details. So this is the kind of way how I think about it. So I don't want to dismiss the representational aspects of data and of visualization. But if we only focus on that, we are just missing so much relevant information.
That's really interesting. As you were talking, thinking about some connections in my head around, we talked about context earlier and how then these traces then add the context. So it would be part of that storytelling piece because it's
Exactly.
like you've got your data visualizations, but I mean some of the readings and things I've been doing around trust and building trust and that type of thing are really important, and that context can help with that. But the other thing that you said that was really interesting, well, there's many things, but one that I'm thinking of right now is that when you spoke about the accepted methods of how you would show data, is an interesting one as well, because if we're in a decision, like we're talking to the government and we have to make a decision about something, perhaps the medium of like performance or something is not going to be suitable, and it won't work in that scenario even if we're showing really valuable data. Whereas if we then go to, a theatre and show a PowerPoint presentation on, these amazing data visualizations, like that won't work either. And obviously they're quite extreme examples, but understanding, so the context of what the data, but then also the context of what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to build awareness but what, I guess, environment you're in is really important as well.
Exactly. So they invited colleagues of mine, Maurice Stefana and Susanne Jaschko, who have had for a long time this project Data Cuisine, where edible data visualizations. And I asked them, why they think that this is the best thing. They say, well, every year, all this graphic design and printing costs, nobody's ever looking at it. It's zero impact. If we want to generate a discussion around corruption and accountability, having this cooking performance where everyone starts talking about the issues at hand and starts trying to think about ways how to express them, how to materialize them. This is the impact that you want, but it's more effective to do it that way rather than just to kind of have another publication or quarterly report that nobody's gonna read.
So how does that work? You go and then you have a meal. Where's the data piece come into it?
Yeah. So I mean, it's okay. So it's a fun project. It's interesting to look into it. I don't think they're still doing it because this was a long time ago. But what they did is, so the theme was about corruption and about like public accountability. So they started by curating different data sets about the environment that the participants were in, like really about their representatives, about their city government and so on. And then the idea, everyone would try to make a cake or a meal or a soup or whatever that visualizes that data set in a physical way and then presents it to everyone. So this was the brief, but again, the outputs are nice because you can take a photo of them and then you can eat them, but they're not so important. It's really the process that is important.
Yeah, I love that. It reminded me, I went to an event a while ago, a friend of mine, and Kovacevic organized, and it was about the planetary boundaries. And we had dinner. We had 9 courses, very small courses, and they're all vegan. And so then each course represented one of the planetary boundaries. And so we had the course, and then we spoke about the planetary boundary that it represented. And I thought that was, another really powerful way. I mean, I still remember the event, and I still, it wasn't like, oh, well, this carrot represents, whatever. But it was like, you just then had a conversation, but you sharing a meal.
Yes.
Yeah, it was really, interesting thing. And I never really thought about it in this context of, it's not exactly the same, but just having something as the conversation starter, the awareness builder, something representing data, but we don't necessarily think about it like that. But I like this idea that you would have a data set and then try and make some kind of meal out of it. That sounds, really interesting. I like that.
So I think there are many different answers to your storytelling question, because what we just talked about right now is about creating some kind of bottom-up, some kind of emergent conversation around the topic that is, of course, guided and everything. So that's one strategy of storytelling. Data journalism, uses a different strategy. They basically have a data, and so there's a lot of the storytelling happening around the artifact of data. And but I think there's also a much more fundamental and basic level of storytelling, which when we think about physical traces, how we figure out what happened. You see some footprints, or you see some scratches on the wall, and you wonder what has happened there, and you try to figure out like what could have made that, and like did someone climb over that wall, or did someone walk there, and how long was that ago? So basically, you immediately tell yourself a story as you're looking at that, and then when you're talking about it to other people, you're also telling a story. So I think there's a fundamentally cognitive mode of storytelling to make sense of traces, and these traces can be physical traces, can also be data, so symbolic data. So I think it's not just okay, now we have data, and now we need to figure out how to talk about it. The very moment we start asking ourselves questions about it, we're already telling stories to ourselves about it. And to really focus on that and emphasize that, for me, is very important, because in many ways it works differently compared to the very scientific process of working. So where you, let's say, you have a research question, you have one or two hypotheses that you're testing. In order to test these hypotheses, you need to control the situation very tightly, make sure that everything is accounted for so that you get a reliable, significant result. But when you work with these data traces, you have to do exactly the opposite. Because you can't really control everything, because it's in the wild, it's in the environment, you cannot really control for it. And it doesn't really help you if you only have one or two hypotheses. You need to generate as many hypotheses as possible. And then you start comparing them, if they contradict each other or not. So for me, storytelling is this research modality that is happening when we start triangulating all these different hypotheses.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been thinking, as you were talking about how then, that is coming at it from different angle. Like I in my head, I'm thinking about how I can use storytelling to influence a decision maker and change a policy. But the context of that decision maker or that community member or whoever it is already has a story in their mind about what they're and so there's lots of angles.
I mean, of course, because if you're context, the decisions are already made before the data, so you only need data to kind of but of course, this would be a very limited and very sad way to use data.
Just using reinforcing the existing bias or whatever. Because bias and heuristics is something I've been also thinking a lot about how you persuade people ethically in a way with data storytelling.
So persuasion, this is a complex topic. I mean, of course, there are many techniques. Back to the beginning when we talked about theories of change, the mechanisms of persuasion are at the end all hypotheses. We think that people are more, easy to convince if we make a very emotional appeal. But even that is not always, the case. So there's this, I think the Tactical Tech Collective many years ago, like 10 years ago, they put out this book, Information for Advocacy, and they started with this beautiful example, or like horrifying example, of the slave ship Brooks. Like I'm sure you've seen this, where, you have the slave ship, a very technical drawing with the black bodies, representation of the slave trade. And it looked like a technical drawing that someone who operates a slave ship would use to kind of plan the space, but this was not the case. It was commissioned by abolitionists, so it was commissioned by opponents of slavery, and they were frankly surprised how well this visualization worked, because what they tried before or in parallel was to appeal to Christian values, to appeal to equality and, the French Revolution and, all these kind of ideals and emotional representations. They used kind of artistic representations. And it's very similar to where we are today. We think that by emotionalizing and by kind of, putting the sad ice bear into the alley, we kind of create empathy for the damage of climate change. But in this case, in this historical example, like a very technical drawing suddenly was more effective than anything else. Now, the wrong conclusion would be to say, oh, I just need to make technical drawings and everyone will understand. This only worked in this one particular case. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that we never know for sure. We have hypotheses of what will persuade people, what will influence their decisions, but we can't tell for sure. We can only make our assumptions and our hypotheses explicit.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier around the modality or the environment where the decision needs to be made. And for example, it's a political thing or a really big issue or something like that. The decision maker doesn't want to use emotion to make that decision. They want to use technical facts. For example, like I'm thinking about an example there.
Exactly.
And so I don't know. It'd be interesting to see further around how, but then, talking about the context, to what point were they already emotionally invested, but then now they just need the technical facts so they can say, like, well, I'm not making this because I care about X, Y, Z. I'm making this because this will this will change something, or, but really how much of that is emotionally driven to that point, and then, in the point in the cycle.
Exactly.
Yes, evidence.
Exactly. I mean, if I know the context in which a decision is going to be made, of course, I can tailor my story or my message to it. Like if I want to convince a certain CEO, or if I want to, convince a bureaucrat, I'm not going to make a TikTok video and show that to them. Like I'm going to use the format that, they can work with. But at the same time, communication processes are always more complicated than we think. Yeah. And if you look at the history of data visualization or mapping, in the 90s, there was this movement of critical cartography where they questioned this model of the map as a communication system. They said, okay, we have a symbology, we have colors, we have a legend, and you look at the legend in order to understand what's going on in the map. And they basically said, well, there is way more than that. And by the way, the legend is rarely really consistent. There is, it's always a sloppy abstraction, and the map itself has many other messages, just the fact about, who made it, that it's a representation of power, or also that it becomes just this kind of thing that you have in your hand in order to feel safe, that you can ask someone else, oh, how do I get to this place? And so, this is not about the content of the map. This is about the construction of meaning and the situation and all these different layers of how communication works. So that's why in the beginning I said, I don't look at visualization anymore through this very constricted model, but I try to consider all these other things as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to talk about and take this question however you like, around impactful, whether it's data visualizations or stories that have left an impression on you. And did it either did it influence your decision-making, thinking? Yeah,
there's so many things, there are a lot of amazing visualizations that really influenced me, all in different ways, because this showed me something that I haven't seen before. Maybe the first visualization, which is like a 3D VR visualization, not a data visualization. It's a data visualization. It's like Masaki Fujihata's Impressing Velocity project, which was the first GPS artwork, where he had a group of students that he sent up on Mount Fuji and mapped their GPS locations. But in order to reconstruct the three-dimensional shape of the mountain, he used the speed as an indicator. So when they were walking fast, he assumed the terrain is very flat, and if they were walking very slow, it's very steep. And so he reconstructed the mountain. It, of course, looked completely distorted. But for me, this was amazing, because now I see, okay, you can capture subjective behavior, like visualization doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to live in this space of objectivity. You can capture how people behave, how they feel, and so on. So this was one. Another one was, I have to give you the name of I think the British Iranian visualization artist who made a visualization of all the casualties of the Iraq war, whether they're Iraqi citizens or soldiers or American soldiers and so on. And what he used is that every casualty was just 1 pixel. So the size of the visualization was limited. You couldn't just blow it up. It just had a certain size in terms of pixel. So this one-to-one relationship I found really interesting, because suddenly you have the materiality of the display and not just abstracted visual language. So I think there are a lot of visualizations that suddenly made me realize something new that the standard visualization model didn't really account for.
Yeah, they're really interesting. And like you said, it's not necessarily the outcome of it. I was thinking about the mountain or whatever. Not actually it's a representation of the mountain, but not a to scale, 100% accurate representation of the mountain. But what it did is capture people's behaviors, and being able to capture that subjectivity is really interesting as well. But I think also then for you were looking at it in a lens of the visualization itself, if that makes sense. Like, you can visualize data in this way, rather than just the outcome again. So like that I find interesting. Like sometimes it's the visualization, the design, the process of it, that can change our mind about something, as well as, I guess, the outcome.
Yes, exactly.
Which I guess, when we're talking about emotions, for example, like for me, the emotion seems to be more linked to the outcome, whereas the processes or the type of visualization, design and things like that then leads to, I don't know, building more knowledge and progressing that way. I'm not sure exactly what that's.
So I have a student in my class, Chloe Hudson-Prock, who looked at affective visualization, and one really interesting thought that she was that the sense, like the emotional involvement, sometimes come from the sense of not knowing what is going on, from the confusion, from the sense that something is missing that you don't know. So, always trying to over encode things, trying to kind of just put more emotional valence into a representation. And she basically made the point that it's exactly the opposite, like when we see something where we can't quite make sense of, and we see that there's something missing, that's the way in. So this was something quite powerful for me.
Like when you look at something, if you're like, oh, I wanted, like maybe it's ignites curiosity.
Yeah, there's something is wrong here, but you can't put your finger on it.
Mm.
But you see that there's a gap, and
You talked a little bit about, I mean, you didn't use this word, but like the interactivity of a visualization or a story.
Yeah.
How does that come into your, well, not necessarily your work, but this kind of whole field, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, interactivity is always such a interesting topic in visualization, because interactivity was central from the very beginning in the 90s, like when the or like 70s, I don't know where you want to start. So it was always there, but somehow it never made it to the center. So interactivity is always a little bit of a stepchild of visualization, maybe because it's hard to do, because it's complicated. But people feel more comfortable talking about static representations rather than interactivity. And with interactivity, I think it's also more than a particularly expert-focused way of exploring a particular data set that these people already know a lot about. But it's a much broader notion of exploration. And if you think about exploration in a broader sense, then it doesn't have to be always an interactive application. I mean, it's something that came up in the whole AI discussion recently for me, because there are all these attempts to somehow marry visualization with, AI in the sense of large language models and so on. And it kind of always feels a bit forced, because the whole idea of visualization is that your eyes are doing the work to discover the insight, but with a large language model, just tells you, so it's kind of there's a goal conflict here. But I think the way how it can be resolved is if the large language model has that you have a conversation in which the model constantly generates interactive visualizations that you can play with, but only for a minute, then you throw it away and it's gone. So there's this ephemerality that is, a radical departure from the idea how, people used to dedicate 5 years of their PhD to develop one interactive system. But rather now this interactive system just exists for a minute and then it's gone. It's something interesting, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And it goes to that, the process piece a little bit as well. Like if you're actively communicating with the AI, asking questions, discovering together. I mean, we could have a lot of conversation about AI.
No, for sure.
I have 2 more questions. We've talked about impactful. We've talked about why, like I guess the why and the process. What are the big challenges when it comes to, I guess, creating visualizations and storytelling? I think we've covered some of them, like already around the, bring it back to the trace and things like that. But yeah, big challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to see how it performs, because you cannot just go off your assumptions. You have to try it out with people, and this is always a challenge because this is hard to do, and is making everything slow. But at the end of the day, if you really take it seriously, that we have to evaluate multiple theories of change, multiple ideas, what could happen, then we need to just, try it out and look at that. We can't just decide the way how we think it should be. And that's for me a challenge because, there's not really a good way to do it.
And is that talking to like understanding your audience?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's this assumption, another term that I have some uneasiness with visualization literacy, because it's not literacy. Visualization is not a text, and the way how we learn to interpret a visualization is not the way how we learn to read. And the responsibility is also different, because as an author of a book, I'm not responsible if my audience can read or not. I mean, that's really not my problem. But as a visualization designer, I have some responsibility of how they, pick up the clues. I need to show some curiosity of how they make sense of it. So literacy is not exactly the right word, but it strikes at the dilemma and the tension that I find interesting here.
Yeah, I find that interesting as well, because we've all got an agreed notion that if I read something, no matter, I guess, language may be different, and, I'll read it in English, whatever. Whatever I take from that is my prerogative, and we take it for face value.
That comes.
We've got like some kind of, whereas for a visualization, if you meant one message, like, oh, the sky is blue, everyone reading it said the sky is green, it's then on me to be like, well, I didn't visualize it properly, or whatever the case is.
I absolutely agree, because and the example that you give, color, is the prime example. For a data visualization or information designer, color is arbitrary. They only care about whether the colors are distinct enough from each other, but they don't care if it's blue or red. A lay audience, the first thing that they always say, why did you choose red? What does red symbolize? Does it symbolize blood, or, things like that? And this is a complete misunderstanding where the designer has a completely different concept of color than the audience. And sometimes anticipating that is a good idea, or just like listening to what they say.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, we're coming to the end. This last question is it's for the listeners. So any suggestions for listeners to use data storytelling in their work or life?
Yeah, I mean, I think always don't get tempted to do something very complicated. Start with something extremely simple, the most simple thing you can do, about getting to a place where you can ask very fundamental questions about the data set, about the issue. So just keep things simple and be curious and take it from there. I think for me, data that needs to be analyzed, data are also speculative objects. So for me, this speculative aspect and playful aspect is very important.
I love that. That's a great way to finish this podcast and finish this interview. Thank you so much, Dietmar. I've loved this conversation. It's got my brain ticking over. Lots of things in there. So thank you again, Dietmar. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, so it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes at zoeether.com/podcast. That's zoeeather.com/podcast. Have you got a question for me or one of our guests? We'd love to hear from you. Just shoot us an email at hello@mysmart.community. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you follow the podcast wherever you listen and connect with us on LinkedIn too. And hey, ratings and reviews are always welcome. They help more smart humans just like you find the show. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.